We're now on. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Strategy and Resources Scrutiny Board. My name is Councillor Mary Harland, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. As you know, following full council last week and the technical issues encountered with Public Eye, the council has now moved to Zoom to deliver its remote committee meetings. We are the second such meeting following Exec Board on Monday. The meeting is now being broadcast live on Leeds City Council's YouTube channel. So a warm welcome to anyone tuning in through YouTube. Today's key theme is finance, both looking back at outturn reports from 2019-20 and also how the council can adapt to manage the financial pressures created by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been an unprecedented period since March, and the financial challenge created by lost income and additional expenditure resulting from the pandemic has created a major budget challenge for us to work through and manage. It's clear that the council has responded extremely well to the pandemic in terms of keeping services operational and finding new ways of working, and a great deal of credit goes out to those that have been working hard to keep the council operation throughout this difficult period. I'd like to register my thanks and thanks on behalf of the board at this stage. Councillor James Lewis is in attendance along with Neil Evans and Victoria Bradshaw to take questions on the financial performance in 2019-20 and explain how the council plans to manage the impact of COVID-19 on our budget, and also to answer any other questions related to the papers before us. At this point, I'd like to invite each member of the board to formally introduce themselves, and I'll start with Councillor Gohar Almas.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gohar Almas, Beeston and Holbeck Ward. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Carlisle.
Hi, Councillor Peter Carlisle, Calvin and Bardley Ward.
Councillor Di Chapman.
Hi, Councillor Di Chapman for Roper Ward.
Councillor Lou Cunningham.
Morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Lou Cunningham, Armley Ward.
Councillor Sam Firth.
Good morning, Councillor Sam Firth, Harewood Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Helen Hayden.
Apologies, Councillor Helen Hayden, Temple Newson Ward.
Councillor David Jenkins.
Councillor David Jenkins, Kennebeck and Seacroft Ward.
Councillor Jim McKenna.
Good morning, Councillor Jim McKenna, Armley Ward member.
Councillor Matthew Robinson.
Councillor Matthew Robinson, Harewood Ward member.
And Councillor Simon Seary.
Morning, Councillor Simon Seary, Pudsey Ward.
Thank you all. And now for our three guests. Over to Councillor James Lewis.
Hi, good morning. Councillor James Lewis, and I'm Deputy Leader and Executive Board Member for Resources.
Thank you, James. Neil Evans.
Hello, it's Neil Evans, Director of Resources and Housing.
And Victoria.
Hello, everyone. It's Victoria Bradshaw, the Chief Finance Officer for the Council.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, moving to the agenda then. Can I ask our Governance Officer, Debbie Oldham, to take us through the first 5 items of business, please?
Thank you, Chair. Under Agenda Item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under Agenda Item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under Agenda Item 3, there are no late items of business. Under Agenda Item 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests?
I take that that's none.
Thank you. Under Agenda Item 5, we have no apologies today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6 on the agenda. That's the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 1st of July. Do members accept these minutes as a true record? I'll assume correct. Thank you, Sam. I'll assume correct unless indicated otherwise. Okay, are there any matters arising from those minutes? Excellent, thank you very much. Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item 7, which focuses on the financial outturn from 2019-2020. I'll ask Victoria or Neil to do a brief presentation before opening up to questions and comments from board members. Councillor Lewis, if you wish to make a comment at the start of each item, please let me know.
Thanks. On this one, I'm happy for Neil and Victoria to crack on.
Okay. Do you both, Neil and Victoria, want to make a comment? Who's going to lead in?
I'll present the report if that's okay.
Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. So, as I said, this is the outturn position for the financial year 2019-20, and it reports an overspend position of 290,000, which, when compared to a net revenue budget of 516.7 million, demonstrates good financial management across the directorates. It does, however, highlight pressures that were highlighted throughout the year. However, we did have robust action plans on to bring those back into within the budget that was approved at full council. This was an improved position on the previous report of 4.1 million, and there's details in the report that how this was mitigated. The collection fund has shown a deficit of 5.5 million, and the collection rates for both council tax and business rates did slightly reduce at the end of the financial year, but that was mainly due to the impact of COVID, because we were just starting to experience that. The report also details that we did start to experience some pressures from COVID, and it was around about a 2.6 million pressure was identified in the report. However, for 2019-20, we did fund that from the grant that we received from central government, and this meant that of the funding that we had at that point, which was 43.7 million, we used 2.64 to cover the COVID pressure, and the remaining is being used in 2021. The report also goes into details about the general reserves, and there has been an increase in the reserves as at the 31st of March 2020, and that was planned for the period. However, we did use some of the reserves because we had a shortfall in the capital receipts for last year, and therefore the contribution budgeted was 4.5 million. We actually increased the reserves by 3.5 million, but the details are in the report. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Neil, would you like to add anything?
No, nothing at this point. I'll happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. James, do you want to add anything at this stage?
No, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'll go to questions. If you could raise your hand. Matthew, I believe you have some.
I do, Chair. Thank you. I wrote to you about the Welcome to Yorkshire grant that was given from the business rates pool, and I note that the report on page 20 mentions the business rates pool. So as agreed in the pre-meet, it seems an appropriate time to bring those up. I believe that letter has been shared with Neil and Victoria, but if it's helpful, I will run through the 6 questions. Is that okay, Chair?
That's fine. That's fine, Matthew. Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
Might be a refresh.
Yeah, for me too. So question 1, have the executive member or officers seen the Welcome to Yorkshire accounts? Question 2, what assurances were council given on Welcome to Yorkshire spending from the grant? Question 3, was the 1.4 million in the pool allocated for something else that will go ahead? Question 4, is a statement coming from council on what was agreed? Question 5, what's the decision-making process for the business rates pool, and are there minutes available to be reviewed? And question 6, what other leftover money is in the pool?
Thanks, Matthew. Who'd like to start with those?
Shall I start with the initial responses to the questions, Councillor Harland?
Yes, please, Victoria. Thank you.
I won't be a moment. Thank you. So just to take each question in turn, the first question was whether we'd seen the Welcome to Yorkshire accounts. The accounts are actually being for an 18-month period. and they are being audited by an external audit. So I think it's Grant Thornton. Once that audit has been completed, then we would have sight of those accounts. So I think that was the first question. There was also around the Welcome to Yorkshire assurances that around how the funding has been spent and used. There is a business case around Welcome to Yorkshire and how the funding is used. That business case would have been gone to the March's pool meeting. However, that didn't take place due to COVID-19. And therefore now, because of COVID-19, the business case has been amended, and all the Yorkshire authorities have been party to the development of the new business case and have had sight of that. So there are assurances around what the funding is to be used for and spent. The third question was the 1.4 million of the business rates pool allocated for something else? The answer is no. The surplus on the business rates pool was for 1920 was to be distributed to the member authorities in accordance with the agreement that was already in place. So the answer that answers that the money was not allocated for anything else. I think the fourth question was around what is the decision making for spending money from the business rates pool. That prior to the end of the financial year, that the decisions were made by the joint committee. And the joint committee was made up of all the leaders from the member authorities, that all the minutes and papers from those meetings are being published on the council's website. So, and I think it says that what other money was left over from the business rates pool, that will be returned to the member authorities, and then we know that Leeds share is being allocated to the REAP projects for our share. So I think that answers the initial questions, Councillor Harland.
Thank you, Victoria. Neil, have you got anything to add at this stage?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So I believe Welcome to Yorkshire is meeting later this week to discuss its future plans. And Councillor Lewis and I were at a meeting where the Chief Exec presented to Yorkshire and Humber leaders with a much changed approach, which is massively reducing the amount of expenditure they have. People will probably be aware that they're going through redundancies and are shifting very much to a digital platform going forward, and pulling back on many of the previous pieces of work that they have done. So I think we're pretty convinced that they have stripped it back to really pretty much the bare minimum. There are a number of things which they have got commitments to, including lease on a building which can't be extricated from. So I think it was a decision. It's a decision in a way for all authorities about whether they believe it is in the interests of Yorkshire to have something which promotes tourism as a whole. And it's kind of felt that the business pool and what was left of the business pool is an appropriate vehicle to use to fund that work. I think as Victoria indicated, the situation has been very much disrupted by COVID, obviously, of not only just their own operations, but actually some of the decision-making processes. So I think we will have to we haven't finally done the decision. We have to kind of work out some of the governance arrangements around that to actually give formal, I suppose, formal effect to the sort of stated ambition to support Welcome to Yorkshire via that fund.
Thank you, Neil. James, have you got anything you'd like to add at this stage?
I think at this stage, I'd just sort of really underline the point that Neil has just made, in that there hasn't, although a lot of councils in Yorkshire, including North Yorkshire County Council, have indicated an intention that we'd like the work that Welcome to Yorkshire does or is planning to do to continue, particularly given the sort of real economic need to give a boost to our hospitality and whatnot sector. We haven't made, as nobody else has, a final decision on funding Welcome to Yorkshire. So I hope that nobody on the scrutiny board is working under the impression that any decisions have been made. Although, like I say, it is clearly our intention. And like as Neil said, we attended a meeting with a presentation from the new chief executive, and I think their approach going forward is to be much more down to earth and humble than perhaps there have been in the past, and I think that's something we'd all welcome. But like I say, in terms of what we need to happen over the next few months, like I say, we need to see what the outcome of their next set of meetings is, and then look at how we move forward. And looking at how we move forward includes the decision-making process as well.
Matthew, do you want to come back?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I think we all agree that Welcome to Yorkshire done well is a real asset to the whole of Yorkshire, not just West Yorkshire as well. And I'm particularly aware that this set of funding is, the business rates pool is around West Yorkshire. Follow-up question, two follow-up questions, if I may. From what's been said, that was originally applied for on that grant has been amended through COVID. Is that the case, and is it now a lesser amount that's been asked for? And the second question being, when is a final decision due, given the redundancy situation at Welcome to Yorkshire?
Who would like to take that one? Neil?
I can't recall, to be honest, Councillor Robinson, the amount we gave last year compared to the amount this year. I don't know if Victoria has that to hand. I think, however, it's what we've got is a situation where they are contracting the amount that they are going to be spending by an enormous amount. So they are shrinking in size and changing their offer to a digital offer and make it being much more much tighter as an organisation in terms of costs. However, what I'm also conscious of is that their subscriptions from things like bed and breakfasts and hotels and all the private people that they normally get small amounts from, but nevertheless kind of add up to a significant contribution, has dropped away dramatically during this last few months with the impact of COVID. So their reliance in the short term upon public sector funds as a proportion of their funding will go up. And they do need support from the public sector to get through this next, this pandemic, frankly. But then clearly their plan is to actually rebalance that going forward by bringing private sector back on board, and their plans are doing things like looking at sort of directing people to hotels and tourist attractions within the area, and looking at how that can actually drive income in the future. But as I say, in the short term, they will be, I think, highly dependent on the public sector funding to actually continue to exist.
Thank you, Neil. Victoria?
I can confirm that the amount that is being requested for this financial year is the same as last financial year, but it's because of the reasons that Neil highlighted previously.
Thank you. Matthew, do you want to come back again?
Yeah, I'm keen not to monopolise time because this is an item on the agenda. perhaps if it's all right,
We can't hear you, Matthew.
this, would be able. Is that any better?
That's better.
Perhaps an update could come back to the board on this at a later date once we know what the final decision is, and we could have a list of the spending from the business rates pool, just so that the board are aware of what other spends are going.
Yeah,
That's
I think
okay,
that.
Chair.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And if we need to go any deeper, then we can make that decision to have it as an item on the work programme, can't we? Going forward, maybe a working group or
Thank
something.
you.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank
Any
you.
more? I'm not seeing any more questions for item 7. So can we move on to item 8? Victoria, I think that's you again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the Treasury Management Outturn Report for 1920. So this shows that we have a net external debt position of 2.162 billion, but that's compared against council assets of 5.6 billion. We had an average interest rate for the year for 1920 of 3.3%. And we did, during 1920, make savings on the Treasury Management budget of 2.8 million through locking in some longer term borrowing. So we moved from shorter term to long term, locks in at lower rates for that period. However, I would say that interest rates, inflation and employment levels now are unknown commodity. So therefore we are moving into an environment that's unprecedented, and therefore we're not undertaking any further borrowing at the moment. But obviously that position might change as we move through the year. We did operate in 1920 within the authorised and operational limits. And I think those are the main points from the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Victoria. Neil or James, have you got anything to add?
No, nothing on that one.
Just, no, I don't think so at this stage. Thank you.
Okay, questions. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. I really don't want to monopolise this for an hour. So thanks, Victoria, for that report. Within the previous item, what we're talking about is selling capital receipts to be able to help pay down our debt. How much of our capital receipts are we seeking to sell off? Because that will obviously affect our asset base. Is question 1. And question 2, and I don't expect Victoria to know it off the top of her head, but if she does, I'll be incredibly impressed, is what is our exposure for borrowing through the Chinese banks, given the instability at the moment with the situation and the potential for tariffs to be put in place, etc.
We're incredibly impressed with Victoria before she answers that question.
I was going to say that, Chair, as well. I was just thinking that.
Not the easiest job she's had in the world of late. Okay, Victoria, thank you.
I was going to say no pressure there then. The capital receipts, we were assuming 48 million for this financial year to help with the repayments of the debt position. Obviously that has changed due to the current situation, so we are forecasting a pressure in that area, which is included in the next report that's on the agenda. The exposure to the Chinese banks, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question. I'm assuming that we don't, but I will double check it and come back to committee on that one. Okay, thank you.
Matthew, do you want to come back?
No, thank you on that. Can we just confirm as well that the assets that are there includes things like school buildings? That's on our asset list register. So there are certain items that are assets that we would be unlikely to ever want to sell off.
That is correct. Within that 5.6 billion, there are assets that we wouldn't sell off, and it does include the schools that haven't converted to academies. It's within that figure.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a chair. Sorry, just very quickly on that one around school assets. As follow on Victoria, obviously where schools convert to academy, we give them the assets. So we do actually give away some of those assets for nothing to schools that convert to academy. So as you know, as we see a great move towards academy schools, and like I say, that section of the asset base will deplete as we have to give the school buildings away.
Thank you for that, James. Okay, Jim.
Thank you, Chair. Victoria, just two questions. One of them, you mentioned that the average interest rate is 2.2% or 3.3%. That does seem extraordinarily high at the moment, where you can almost borrow at zero interest. I know we're trying to change that by laying off and get cheaper rates, but it does seem to me high. And my other question is, you mentioned that we had assets of over 5 billion and debts of 2-something billion. Doesn't that make us in good financial health, or what really is the value of those assets? I guess in dire circumstances we could sell them, but given the state of things on the pandemic, maybe that 5 billion isn't quite what we could achieve. It might be a lot lower. Has that been updated or reconsidered? Thank you, Chair.
Victoria.
Okay, thank you. First question around the interest rates. So 3.3% is the average interest paid. So we do have some historical loans that we took out a number of years ago when interest rates would be higher. But we are taking advantage of the lower interest rates that we're currently experiencing. And we did undertake last year some unprecedented low interest rates. So we took some loans on the longer term that were at low interest rate basis. So that's why she's an average over the whole portfolio of debt. So that's why it might seem higher than some of the interest rates that we can currently look in at. In regard to the asset base, I think there's two parts to the question. The first is that when you compare the council to a private sector company, we are low geared. So that means that we haven't, the amount of borrowing that we've got against our assets is quite low compared to a private sector company. So we have got a lot of resilience there within the asset base. But obviously, as previously was highlighted, there are some assets that we wouldn't sell. So it is a good position from that perspective. In regard to the value of those assets, we have just closed the accounts for 2019-20, and they're currently on deposit. The auditors are in at the moment, and they are having a look at asset values. But because of the number of transactions that were taking place around the time of the end of the financial year, it was very difficult to say whether the value of those assets had reduced or maintained. We will be looking at that again in September, but at the moment it does look like values haven't materially reduced. But we are looking at the transactions that are going through, because that does help inform us. Okay, so it has been reviewed. I suppose that's the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Jim, do you want to come back?
I do, Chair, and I thank Victoria for those very full answers. Very reassuring. We shall keep an eye on the true value of our assets, obviously. But it does still seem, coming back to the interest rate of 3.3%, it does seem very high. I mean, we can almost borrow now at 0% or 0.1 or 0.3. Has any consideration been given to paying off the historically high interest rates loans and borrowing that money at a much lower rate? It does seem to me extremely high, 3.3%. It's just unheard of these days. I know it's historical, but I do think there's room for manoeuvre there. Thank you, Chair.
Victoria?
Thank you, Chair. We do look at the loans, at the loan book constantly, and we are looking for opportunities. However, if we repaid a loan, we do have to pay what's called a premium. So we have to pay that to unlock the loan to be able to then reborrow at a lower interest rate. And we review that on a regular basis. Unfortunately, the amount we'd have to pay in compensation to come out of that loan would be greater than the benefit that we would receive from locking in at the lower rates. But I can assure you it is something that we're constantly looking at and looking at all opportunities around. driving value out of those loans that we undertake. And that's why we've had a shift in the strategy, where we're looking at longer term at these very unprecedented low rates to get us value for the long term over 40, 50 years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Neil.
Yeah, I mean, just to give a bit of flavour, I think Victoria can correct my figures, I'm sure, but I think we were approaching nearly 500 million, which we shifted last year from long to lower rates. So that exercise has gone forward in an unprecedented way over this last sort of 12 months or so, and it has delivered very significant revenue savings for us as well. As Victoria says, we are sometimes tied in with penalties, and clearly when people were taking out loans for 4 or 5% 30 years ago, they were probably regarded as a bargain then, when interest rates will probably remember might have been touching 10% plus at various points during that period.
Thank you, Neil. Are you satisfied with that, Jim?
Yes, I am, Chair. As long as these things are kept under review, which Victoria has assured me they will be, it does seem to me that every opportunity we have to reduce the 3.3% on average, which is too high, and I know it's historical, but every opportunity we have, we should take. It would mean an awful lot of difference to our spending power in the coming years. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jim. I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you for those comments, and we'll move on now to the more substantive agenda item. I would say that we probably get more questions on this one than the last couple. That's the agenda item 9, dealing with the impact of COVID-19 on the council's financial position. So Victoria, Neil and James, any comments you need to make, and then we'll go into questions. Thank you.
Okay,
Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. I would start by saying this is an unprecedented position, and that the council set a robust budget position, but obviously we are experiencing significant increases in expenditure and losses of income from the impact of COVID. You can see in table 1 that we are currently projecting 193.5 million overspend. That is before that is before government grants, and it covers over the 2 years. So for this position is updated constantly, and we're doing monthly reports. So you will, this committee will receive updated positions where we're working hard to reduce the expenditure that's being forecast and also the income assumptions on the budget. That position does take into consideration the collection fund impact. So this is where we're forecasting business rates and council tax reductions from collection, and those are will be held in the collection fund. Now on this report we were assuming that would impact in 21-22. We have had an updated announcement from government that they are saying that we can spread that over a 3-year period, so that will impact in 21-22, 22-23 and 23-24. I would also say that this is changing on a daily basis. So as we're getting more information through, we're reforecasting what we think is going to happen around council tax, the number of people who are eligible for support in their council tax and therefore won't be experiencing the liability. Also having a keen eye on business rates and what's happening to businesses in the region, see around the payment of those rates will have an impact. So at this point this report was written, we were forecasting a 60.9 million reduction in that area, but that has been revised downwards. So I would say that the main concern for us is obviously the ongoing impact as well for 21-22, and there is for the financial year 21-22, and there is an awful lot of work at the moment looking at how we can mitigate this unprecedented position that we're now faced in. So I think if I leave it there and just open it up to questions, Councillor Harland, please. I think, Councillor Harland, I think you're on mute, so I don't think we heard that. Sorry, thank you.
Sorry. Neil, James, would you like to add anything at this stage?
The only point I'd make, I think Victoria sort of indicated it, but this is subject to a huge amount of assumptions, and therefore there will be big swings, I think, between different months in a way that we're not used to and you're not used to seeing. So I'm anticipating next month we will show quite a marked reduction. We've been working hard to try to get the figures down as much as we can, but clearly there are just lots of unknown issues. So, for example, sports centres will reopen in August. We don't know what level of uptake there will be. It's just an absolute best guess at this moment in time, and that will go for many other kind of income streams as well. So it's just to kind of caution members about not taking these figures absolutely at face value. There are a lot, this is an indication of where we think we are. We will reporting month by month. We'll get more certain as we go through. I suppose what I can be pretty certain about, however, is that at the end of it all, we are still likely to be showing a very significant financial gap, and that isn't going to go away.
Thanks, Neil. James?
Nothing to add at this stage, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Councillor Almas.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around, obviously we're going through unprecedented times and we all appreciate that. And we don't know what the new normal is going to be as well with regards to our staff and, coming to the offices and using the transport facilities and so on. What sort of projections have we got in terms of some of the savings in terms of, fuel and in terms of heating and other costs as well of the premises, if God forbid this does continue into October, November kind of thing, please? Thank you. This year.
Thank you, Chair. There is a lot of work being undertaken with directorates, identifying the savings from those areas, and at the moment we are forecasting in period one it was a 4.1 million impact. We have reviewed that over the last 2 months and we're forecasting 4.7 million saving, which is as an outcome of the COVID-19, and that's where we are at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Victoria. Do you want to come back, Gohar?
Yeah, may I just also quickly sort of inquire for our knowledge, what might be the other, if you like, side impacts of that as well? Because obviously, along with all the financial negatives that we've got, there might be some other aspects where we're making some savings as well. Just for my knowledge, in terms of, because obviously some of these savings are visible in terms of fuel and premises and heating and all the rest of it. But are there any other areas as well where perhaps there are some financial sort of gains that we've made?
Victoria?
I think there'll be opportunities that we are looking at the moment across the whole of the council. I think you've covered the main ones around like the assets, the transport, the savings from the buildings, etc. I don't know if Neil wants to add anything further.
Thanks, Victoria. Neil?
Yeah, I mean, there clearly are things which we aren't doing, like events, which which would ordinarily have cost, but there are also things like paper, and everybody's got used to electronic transactions and so forth. So there are things which come out of that. I think the other point is that we are also reviewing more now on a long-term basis what our requirements for buildings will be longer term. So I think on the basis that we're getting something like an 80% of staff have said that they would feel that they could work more than half their time at home on the basis of what they've experienced over this last few months. Now we clearly need to take a view about whether that's as effective as being in the office, and the judgments have to be made. But I don't think anybody probably thinks that we will, even if we find a full solution to this, go back to a position where the majority, everybody's working, Monday to Friday, and therefore our asset base will need to change to reflect that. And in a way, we probably shift towards places where people can actually meet up and collaborate, rather than necessarily be sat at a desk doing work which actually they've been happy actually doing effectively from home. So there are short-term savings around it, but there are also long-term, I think, adjustments which we'll make, which we need, to take advantage of this experience. That's kind of like a more positive side of it.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, I've got Matthew, then Jim, then Helen. So Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. 2 questions, please, if that's okay. The first one is, given that the powers are being made available for local lockdowns to take place, is the council setting a reserve or a local lockdown budget in case something happens here in Leeds, or is there a wider plan to do that in West Yorkshire? The second area is the council has looked at the past at rolling out ultra-fast broadband to council buildings and using the network to then expand that out to the local neighbourhoods around them. Given that we may be selling some of those buildings, or that staff won't be in them in the same way, is that plan being reviewed, especially as we all know now access to high-speed broadband is more important than ever?
Yeah, I could probably have a go at both. So just the last one first. So we are proceeding with the work around the rollout of superfast broadband and using our asset base for it. We are taking into account, as Councillor Robinson is asking, what we may come out of. I think, however, the primary kind of network is particularly linked to things like the school network that we have, and primary schools and so forth. So it does actually give a very good distribution right across the city. Given the reach of primary schools, which are still largely connected to the council and which aren't in academies. So I think actually I'm still pretty optimistic that despite what I've just said, we will get a very good rollout across the city, which will help both as a council, but also more broadly the city with its economic recovery. In terms of local outbreaks, I mean, being frank with you here, our position is not about being able to set a reserve. It's actually the gap which we actually have in our finances, full stop. So I think a local outbreak, if actually that led to further problems around business rates and so forth, that will add to our problems. And it's probably possibly a piece of work we need to do to kind of look at estimating what that impact would be, but we haven't been in position to actually make provision for it, because as we're reporting at the moment, we've got actually unresolved budget gaps both this year and going into next.
Thank you, Neil. Are you okay with that, Matthew? Okay, I've got Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I think Neil has answered one of my questions, so I won't dwell on that. But to Victoria, it does seem an improving position, which is heartening, but a long way to go. We're not out of the woods yet. I just wonder, Victoria, is any of our shortfalling council tax payments recoverable next year, or 21 or 22? I know the government have put money into for businesses, but there still must be a very high degree of non-payment, and people who have paid their council tax would like to think that there is some plan to try to recover it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Jim. Victoria?
Okay, thank you, Chair. There's two elements to the side of the council tax forecast. So the first is around, like you said, the non-recovery of people who are due, who are liable for their council tax, and we will be recommencing pursuing the debt where it is due. However, the projections that we're forecasting going forward for next financial year and future years is around those people who won't be liable for council tax going forward, because they will, unfortunately, we're expecting increased numbers on people being made unemployed, and therefore they would be eligible for council tax support from the council, and that therefore has a knock-on impact of affecting our council tax base, and that's the projections that we're showing going forward. So I think that answers the two parts. Thank you.
Okay. Jim, are you okay with that?
I'm fine with that, Chair. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you. Right, I'll go to Helen and then David.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Just going back to Councillor Almus's point about potential savings, and these might be longer term ones rather than short term ones, but from what I'm hearing in adult and health scrutiny is that the partnership working was outstanding, and it was due to a really strong base before we went into this pandemic and into this really uncertain times. So they just all the trusts plus adult social care plus the third sector just went into action completely together. Now, in terms of finances, this may mean for the future that what was projected to take about 5 years to get to a kind of joint commissioning, a truly joint commissioning, has taken about 3 months because of, so those potential savings of working together and sharing the broader pot of money in adult health. And now that's not to say that if we have to find savings, we are the biggest taker of money from the council budget. So in terms of adult social care, but there definitely has to be both financial and savings, but also positive outcomes for people we care for in the community in terms of that partnership working amongst the NHS and third sector, as well as adult social care.
Thank you for that, Helen. Would anybody want to respond to that? James?
I think I'll start by noting on adult social care. Obviously, it's an area where without COVID, we'd seen huge financial pressure. As Helen mentioned, it's our biggest area of spending as a council, and we were still been looking for a longer term solution that means that adult social care is funded fairly and it doesn't have a disproportionate impact on our budget, both in terms of the overall spending and also the risks that occur in adult social care that we know are coming over time. Just looking at the budget going forward, with or without COVID, we know that we're starting a new spending settlement phase in April next year, which is the government's allocation of resource to all government departments, including obviously health, social care and local government. And I think one of the pieces of outcomes we were looking for that was a longer term settlement on social care funding. So Helen's right, I think there's been a lot of good work in recent months around working closely with partners in the health and social care setting. But I do think we need, again, whether without COVID, we needed a longer term settlement on funding around that area. And that's something that I know it's not as immediate as perhaps some of the financial challenges, but as we look across the council's longer term financial strategy, it is something we need to work, like I say, with our partners in the city and with the government to get a settlement on.
Thank you, James. I think we can all agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I've got David.
Yeah, I've got 2 points. One on page 88 at the bottom about the Public Works Loan Board debt, which would be fantastic if the government would write that off. But it mentions that there's a £9 million saving. Now, is that that if there was a total write-off, or is that what would be the amount if it was reduced back to the interest rate before it went up? Was it in December time? And my second point is on 3.43 on page 92 about social care funding. Could we not write as a scrutiny board to the government saying we need a decision on social care funding sooner rather than later?
I think that would probably be your board, would it, Helen?
Sorry, I'm not unable to unmute myself. We could certainly look at doing that. I mean, in terms of social care funding, I would hope that the fantastic work that our social carers and carers have done under extreme pressure and at risk to themselves and their families would hopefully accelerate a proper funding settlement by the government along the lines and protected along the lines that the NHS have had, although they've not had enough either. But it's I would take that back to my board, and we can certainly write from my board. And if you wanted to do it as a joint thing, as a joint letter from the two of us, absolutely, because I think what has been highlighted in this pandemic is just how much we need our carers and how much we need our social workers, and that, you know, and how much they've stepped up to the plate and deserve a proper funded settlement, and well-run councils like ourselves and well-run adult social care departments really need that recognition and that status, as well as a proper funding plan.
Excellent, thank you, Helen. I think that makes sense, a joint approach. The public work, I always get this wrong, Works Loan Board. Victoria, do you want to take that one?
Yes, that's correct. The actual amount is the £9 million would be the same if the PWLB debt was written off. But the difference is 100 basis points, and I'd have to find out what that would equate to, because at the moment they added 100 basis points on what it was previously last summer. Okay, so I'll find that out and come back to the committee on that.
Thank you, Victoria. Excellent. Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. We're all satisfied with that? Well, thank you, Victoria, Neil and James, for attending today and providing the answers and you know, a commitment to get back to us with answers that we were not readily to hand. It's clear that dealing with the consequences of COVID and trying to lobby government for additional resources will be a key theme throughout the financial year, and any help that the scrutiny board can give with that, then please let us know. But thanks again, and I know I said it earlier, but the hard work that officers have been putting in from right across the council, but particularly these financial worrying times, a heartfelt thank you from me personally on this board. So thanks for coming. You're now free to go if you wish to, but thanks again.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye now.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, all.
Not you, Jim. You're not allowed to go yet.
Oh, am I not? Oh.
No. Okay, we'll move on to item 10, which is the work schedule. So given the issues we've had with technology and the priority we've given to devolution in recent months, this is not yet fully developed. So I'd welcome members' comments and suggestions for future work. I think Matthew's Welcome to Yorkshire is probably one that we'll look at more in depth when we have the results of the audit, etc. But I think it'll be worthwhile. So Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at the work schedule, the September meeting has got like looks to have a theme around risk management. There's a couple of reports flagged up and a recommendation tracking item. We could perhaps build some more in around that, and obviously featuring Councillor Robinson's request for scrutiny if we're able to bring that back as a single item, and then with more detail in it. Then moving into October, there are again some more recommendation tracking items. I mean, really, the schedule following that, other than the standard January, which is a standard type agenda for the budget setting process. I think there's room for suggestions from members. I mean, there's some things that have come out of discussion today, perhaps the following the September Executive Board report, which will provide more detail on the potential service changes and more budgetary challenges that are coming. We could build something into the October meeting around that as well. But as you said, Chairman, if there are suggestions from members, and obviously we could look to build something into that, obviously working together between myself and you to see which way we take it.
Okay. Jim. You're on mute, Jim. Jim, you're on mute. Ah, there you go.
I'm here. Sorry, Chair. I just had a 7-year-old coming in who's chomping at the bit to go to Blackpool. So I'll be very quick. Yeah, I know.
Just for those of you that weren't in at the beginning, Jim is in Lytham St Anne's at the minute. He's not in his living room, so Blackpool's not too much of a stretch.
No, just a bus and a tram ride or a car journey. Chair, I just wondered, given our conversation regarding recoverable amounts of council tax, now I know a lot of it will be wrote off, but there clearly are people who can afford to pay and should have paid, and maybe have taken advantage of the pandemic, and maybe that's a bit disingenuous, but I'm sure there are people who fit in that category. So I'd like us to consider some type of report of how we might have some recovery on that in 21-22. And I just wonder, given the budget situation, that January might be a bit late. Could we move that forward a bit? And I know Bob has said we could start some of the discussions in October. It seems to me that's the right time, given that we may have to do another budget anyway after September, so all that's up in the air, and I think we should consider these before we close down the work programme, because these are very important issues that we will need to address and need to be on top of. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Jim. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just conscious that there were a number of points that Neil raised in the items we're looking at today, in terms of people's opinions on home working and such, and changing to a different way of working. That's got huge implications, obviously, for staffing and policies and capital management going forward. And I think it would seem that this board should look at what the council can do to support workers to be more flexible, to see what this new normal is. And this is going to take some months to come back and see how it changes. But obviously that's going to be a big issue that probably will want to move fast. And while other boards may be looking at how that affects the city in terms of skills and transport, then this one should look at how we can support our staff to move towards this, and how that could in turn have benefits for the council's financial position.
Okay, lovely. Any more? No? Well, thanks for those comments. So, sorry, Matthew.
Chair, yeah, I completely concur with what Jim was saying, and I think there's a piece of work to be done, and I think Pete is absolutely right. It's huge, the implications of people home working, and getting an idea and a steer of where the council's thinking, even department by department, looking at this would be quite useful. I'm aware that there'll also be some sort of strategy about how the council gets back to normal, including our own meetings. And are we intending to be in person in September, or what is the plan for rolling that out too?
Oh, I'm not sure about that one. I mean, you know, you're right.
I've missed you, Mary. That's what it is. I've missed you.
Miss me in the flesh, Matthew. And there's
No,
more of it. There's more of it.
I've missed the cookies and muffins.
I'll be back. I'll be back. But I mean, ideally, it's like Neil mentioned earlier about the 80% of staff are happy to continue working from home or a bit of hybrid. That means that there's 20% that aren't. And I know when we had the staff survey at previous meetings, there were a lot that were struggling with working from home. And, you know, absolutely agree, Peter, we need to be supporting our staff. But so are you happy for me and Rob to discuss what we've talked about, and then we'll come back with an update at the next September meeting about the work programme going forward, and I'll try and find out how far down the line we are of meeting in person, because I miss you all too.
Can I just
Thank you,
say
Chair.
something
I'm
though
happy with
about,
that.
yeah, can I just say about meeting in person though, although I miss you all dreadfully, when you've got childcare commitments and things like that, it's so much easier to do it this way. It's, yeah, it's, you know, I obviously I wouldn't be able to kind of leave you all to go and pick up from school or whatever, but it's just, yeah, and my children are happier that I'm sitting in here and, you know, rather than being away.
Well,
all the time.
hopefully your children will be back in school by then.
Well, yes, and this type of meeting's fine. I'm just thinking about
other
kind of other
meeting,
meetings that go into the evening, and you know, our big council ones. It's although I take it that I would rather be in the building in many ways. Yeah, it's there are some benefits, and I kind of know where that 80% of staff are coming from in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a real eye opener as the technology, and I think we finally cracked it today. I think. Thanks
Chair,
to. Sorry,
Chair,
go on.
can I just say to Helen's comments, very well made actually, but I think we will always have a hybrid situation where we have hybrid cards now, so hybrid Zoom meeting where people can be in attendance, but if they've got any problems, they can participate through Zoom. I don't think that's ever going to die, and I don't think we should let it. And I hope Bob will take those comments back. We should look at for the future, when it is safe to have meetings, that we will still have members who can engage through Zoom or some other more reliable method.
Good point.
But I do think it's worked very well today, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So do I.
Yeah.
Could I just,
of course you can, Sam.
I just wanted to say, further to what was mentioned before, maybe a HR update might be helpful for the board, just simply to understand how many staff have utilised it, and also to understand which departments maybe have more staff that are unwilling to, or unhappy or uncomfortable with the current situation, and also to understand the costs of it as well, because I know from a professional perspective from my own company that I work for how much the cost was, and that was the reason they wouldn't potentially offer it as widely as they did because of COVID. But I think that certainly now the flexibility that's available is something to look into.
Councillor Howland, there's been a staff flash survey, I think is the terminology that's been done.
Right.
I don't know if we'll be able to get a hold of that for one of the future meetings. And on the change in the workplace comments, I think that's been looked at by this board, although before my time. I think that is something that could fit in terms of what officers have been working on. I think from my officer role, I've heard some discussion around changing the workplace and how that might fit in, and how the council's going to look to address it based on the comments that Neil made earlier. So that could be packaged together, I think, at some point in the next two meetings, maybe with your agreement, obviously, Chair.
Yeah. So Rob and I'll go away and discuss, and we'll get a timetable to bring back to September and flesh out the bones on that. If that's it. Sorry, Di.
I was just going to say, as Sam said, I think we need to look at, well, we need to just bear in mind there is health and safety implications from working at home on a long-term basis. You know, you do have to have the proper furniture. I know, from where we are and where I work.
Yep, absolutely.
The health and safety executive have been very relaxed, but they won't be on a long-term basis.
No, that's true.
That needs to be factored in.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for all those comments. And the time and place next meeting, place to be determined. 7th of September at 10:30. And thanks for coming. It's been lovely to literally see you all.
You too, Chair.
Take care and thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Bye
Thank
now.
you, Chair. Well done.
Bye.
Thank you.